Welcome to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, we travel deep into the forgotten wilds of the Appalachian Mountains, where the ridges hide more than shadows, where the trails twist into places not found on maps, and where footsteps follow long after you stop walking. In this episode, I bring you 8 disturbing encounters, told by those who claim to have crossed paths with people who should not have been out there at all. Some returned shaken and scarred, others were never seen again. These are not campfire tales. They are warnings, scattered pieces of truth, carried out of the backwoods by those lucky enough to escape. If you are new here, consider subscribing. And if you have ever felt eyes watching you from the tree line, leave a comment and share where you are listening from. Every voice adds to the map, and the map is always growing. Now, let the lights fall low. Listen closely, for out here, the silence is never empty. When I pulled up to the cabin, the gravel under my tires was the only sound for miles. The mountains wrapped around me like a long-forgotten coat, heavy, quiet, and filled with that kind of damp wood smell that sticks to your skin. I killed the engine and stepped out into air so clean it felt like drinking ice water. That was the whole point. Really, no neighbors, no traffic, no Wi-Fi pings every 5 minutes. Just trees, time, and the trail I used to walk with my great-aunt Mabel before she passed. I was 34, newly single, and burned out like the bottom of an old kettle. Freelancing as a book editor sounded glamorous until I realized it mostly meant rewriting bad paragraphs in worse apartments. Raleigh had started to feel like a sealed box, loud, crowded, and full of people pretending not to unravel. I needed out. I remembered Mabel's stories about keeping the dark on the outside, how she'd nail the windows shut and make me stay indoors after the sun dropped below the ridgeline. At the time, I thought she was just scared of bears. Now, I wasn't so sure. The cabin looked fine at first. Old but solid, tucked into a grove of hickories, far enough off the service road that my car barely made it up the incline. But as I circled the structure, duffel bag over my shoulder, I realized something strange. There was no front door, just 3 wooden walls, and one side with a narrow entrance, covered in thick boards, nailed across, like someone had tried to seal it shut from the outside. My key fit the padlock on a smaller, inset panel. It groaned as I pushed it open and stepped inside. Everything was neat, clean floors, sparse furniture. Whoever lived here before kept it minimal. A table, a wood stove, a small kitchen nook, a mattress on a frame, and a dozen mirrors scattered through the rooms. But every mirror, I noticed, was turned to face the wall. No glass visible. I chalked it up to superstition or maybe just someone's weird decorating taste. But still, I left them like that. I didn't like the idea of seeing myself out here. Not that kind of alone. The first night, the wind started after midnight. That wasn't unusual. September in the Appalachians is restless. But it didn't move like wind should. It didn't rise through the trees or whip against the roof. It echoed downward, as if funneled from the hills into the ground. I sat up, ears straining, then shook it off. Stress, probably just the draft slipping under the floorboards. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. I made coffee, opened my laptop to work on a manuscript, and spent the day editing dialogue between 2 fictional teenagers caught in some apocalypse. Around 4, I walked the old trail behind the cabin, the same one Mabel and I used to take when I was 9 or 10. She always kept me close. Once, I tried to run ahead and she yanked me back so hard I skinned my knees. "You don't go off trail here," she'd warned. "Not this far up." I thought she meant snakes. That evening, I cooked on the propane stove, lit a fire, and settled with a book. Just as I was dozing off, I heard it, a light tapping, like fingertips, not on the windows or roof, but along the walls. Low, rhythmic. I held my breath. The fire crackled. The tapping stopped. The second night, it came again. Same time. Same soft, deliberate taps. I stayed still, counting between them. 4 seconds, then 5, then silence. I got up, Checked the porch with my flashlight, but saw nothing, just trees and darkness. Then I glanced under the slats of the cabin and froze. In the dirt below, barely visible in the dust, were a series of small handprints. Too small to be adult, but they weren't clustered like a child playing. They were spaced out, long gaps between them, like crawling. By the third day, I was keeping my boots on inside. The mirrors stayed turned. The doors stayed locked, and I avoided the cellar entirely. It was a squat door near the kitchen, with a heavy bolt and a wooden bar you could latch from the inside. I didn't need anything from down there. Except that night, I forgot. I'd gone down earlier to grab firewood from the stack someone had left. I must have left the latch undone. It was just after midnight when I heard the creak. Not the wind. Not the tapping. A hinge. I grabbed my phone and stepped into the hallway. The cellar door was cracked open. A shadow spilled onto the floor. Then it moved. Something was halfway up the stairs. A figure, hunched low, its head cocked too far to the side like it had no bones. Its mouth was slack, open. The light from my phone hit its face, and its eyes caught it like glass. Reflective, empty. We locked eyes for a breathless second. Then it slid backward, silently, and pulled the door shut with a careful click. I didn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace until dawn, holding the poker with both hands, and I nailed the cellar shut. By sunrise, the cellar door had 3 nails in each hinge and 2 more through the center plank. I used the fireplace tongs to hammer them in, hands shaking hard enough. I bent the first nail sideways. I couldn't explain what I'd seen. It didn't make sense, and that made it worse. I kept thinking if I could name it, it'd lose some power. Intruder, animal, hallucination, but none of those fit. I tried calling the house swap host. The app had listed a profile named Rural Dweller 45. No photo, just a badge that said verified off-grid listing. But when I tapped open the messages, the thread was gone. No inbox. No account history. Just a blank screen and a loading icon. My stomach turned cold. I checked my email confirmation. Nothing. Like I'd imagined the entire transaction. Panic rising, I grabbed my keys and drove. The road out wound along the ridge. Narrow and steep. But I'd done it before. This time, though, about 3 miles down, the way was blocked. A rockfall, fresh, with dust still rising. Trees along the shoulder leaned at odd angles like they'd been pushed. I got out and climbed a bit, tried to shift the smaller rocks. They didn't budge. Not alone, not without gear. I turned around and went back. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed not to. But the sun was already lowering behind the trees. And being stuck out here at night felt worse. When I reached the cabin, I noticed it immediately. The mirrors were turned again. All of them, facing out now. One in the hallway reflected the front room in full. And in the reflection, the cellar door looked wide open. But when I turned, it was still shut, still nailed. That night, I dragged my mattress into the living room. I wanted light, a clear view of every wall. The fireplace still held a slow burn, and I stacked wood beside it just in case. I kept the poker close. My phone, useless now, stayed under my pillow like a talisman. For a while, there was nothing. No tapping, no wind. The cabin felt dead quiet, like the air itself had gone still. I convinced myself it was stress. That I'd finally snapped, like Mabel warned would happen if you spent too long listening to the hills. Around 3 a.m., something scraped. Not outside, not on the walls, under the floor. I sat up, heart pounding. The rug beneath my mattress shifted, just a small ripple, like something brushing from beneath. I froze. Then it moved again, longer this time. A slow, deliberate push like something crawling underneath. My mouth went dry. Then a hand shot out from the floorboard crack. Thin, gray, fingers too long, knuckles bent the wrong way. It grabbed the edge of my blanket and pulled. I screamed and rolled backward. Boards cracked. The rug buckled. Then the whole floor split open, not like a trapdoor, but like something pushing its way through. 3 figures rose, ash-gray skin stretched thin over joints, eyes black as cave water, jaws slack but twitching. They moved like they were half falling, half reaching. One of them hissed, not with its mouth, but from its throat, dry and fast like air through reeds. I grabbed the poker and swung. The first hit landed with a wet crunch, and the thing staggered, not backward, sideways, like it didn't understand how balance worked. Another one lunged, and I felt its hand catch my sweater. A tug, a tearing sound. I yanked away and dove toward the nearest window, shoulder first. The glass broke around me, not loud, just a thin snap like ice cracking. Cold air hit me, then dirt. Then I ran, barefoot through leaves and needles, the ground cut and slick. I didn't stop to look back. I just followed the slope, the old trail. Whatever direction didn't feel like it was pulling me under. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until the moonlight turned the trees to ghosts. I was found the next day, barefoot and bleeding at the ranger station near a service trailhead, half a mile from the main road. I told them everything. They didn't write it down. Just looked at each other with that expression people wear when they think you're not crazy. Just tired. Later, one of them pulled me aside and said, "The cabin I described had been condemned 10 years ago. No structure should be standing there. And if it was, I should consider myself lucky it let me leave." I moved back to Raleigh after that. Found a second-floor apartment with no crawl space, no attic, no basement. I left the mountains behind. Or tried to. Because some nights, I still wake up at 3 a.m., not from dreams, from sound, tapping, under the floor, just beneath my bed. Leaves crunched under my boots in that dry, papery way they only do in early fall. We were climbing the west ridge above Pine Hollow, the sun just starting to slide down behind the trees. The air had that bite to it, not cold yet, but sharp enough to remind you that summer was gone for good. Trevor was a few yards ahead, moving faster than I expected, his pack bouncing a little with each step. He hadn't said much in the past hour, just nodded when I pointed out the turnoff and muttered something about the trail being steeper than he remembered. He was always like that, quiet when he was thinking. We used to hike this same ridge every October, back before life got messy. He did 3 months in rehab last winter, and this trip was supposed to be a reset. Tradition. We'd both grown up in Wise County. We used to take our pellet guns into these woods when we were 12 and pretend we were tracking something dangerous. I remember getting lost once when I was 8. Pine Hollow Trail forked, and I picked the wrong way. Trevor didn't want to admit we were turned around. So we wandered for hours until my uncle finally fired his rifle 3 times in the air. The sound bounced off the hills like thunder. That was the thing about these woods. They echoed, even when nothing was moving. It never felt still. I wiped sweat from my forehead and paused to catch my breath near a poplar that had been split by lightning sometime in the last few years. That's when I saw it. A mark carved deep into the bark, maybe 3 feet off the ground. It wasn't initials or some hunter's tag. It looked like an eye, oval and wide, with a long vertical slit through the center. Sharp lines, too deliberate to be random. "You see this?" I called. Trevor circled back and squinted at it. "Weird," he said. "Maybe some kind of weirdo left it. These woods are full of them." He shrugged it off and kept walking. But a few minutes later, I spotted something else, just off the trail, maybe 10 yards in. A ring of small bones, rib bones, mostly, arranged in a perfect circle, clean, picked dry. I pointed again, and Trevor just laughed. I said, "Kids messing around. You ever seen how bored teenagers get around here? They fact in for minos. They fact in now, they sack in them. Sub you know when out you day for minos." We set up camp near the split boulder we always used. Same spot every year. Flat ground, just close enough to the ridge that you could see stars through the trees. We built a fire, roasted some foil-wrapped sausages, and passed a flask back and forth. For a while, it felt normal again, comfortable. But when I went to take a leak behind the brush, the woods felt too quiet. No owls, no insects, just this thick, pressing stillness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something, heavy, uneven steps in the dark, not like a deer or a raccoon. Slower, purposeful, crunch, pause, crunch. I sat up, listening. The fire had burned down to coals. Trevor was snoring softly. I stayed that way for over an hour, staring at the tree line, but nothing came close. Still, I didn't sleep much. By morning, the fire pit had been disturbed. The rocks we'd circled it with were knocked aside, and half-burnt sticks were scattered around like something had rummaged through them. Probably an opossum, Trevor said, rubbing his eyes. But then he found his boots, both of them filled with cold, muddy water. His socks were soaked, and there hadn't been a drop of rain. The ground was dry. We just looked at each other for a long second, neither one of us wanting to say what we were thinking. Later that morning, as we packed up, we found a trail that hadn't been there before. Narrow, winding off from the usual path like it had peeled open overnight. The dirt looked recently disturbed, like something had moved through, flattening the underbrush. Trevor stood at the edge of it, hands on his hips. Could be new growth clearing up an old path. He said, "Let's check it out, just for a bit." I hesitated. Everything in me said no, but I followed. The trees grew closer, the farther we went. The canopy thickened. The air felt denser, cooler, like a basement that had never been aired out. We didn't talk much, just walked, step after step, surrounded by trunks that all looked the same. I kept glancing over my shoulder. No birds, no squirrels, not even a breeze. Just that feeling, the one you get when someone's watching you from a place you can't quite see. Eventually, we stepped into a clearing. The space opened so suddenly it felt like the woods had exhaled. At first I didn't see it, just sticks. Branches lashed together in crooked lattices, forming half walls and crude frames. One had a patch of fur draped over it, dark and matted. Primitive tools leaned against a stump, bone handles, flint edges. I felt something twist in my gut. This wasn't camping. This was something else. Then came the sound, low and ragged, like a dog growling deep in its chest. I turned. Behind one of the stick shelters, something shifted. A figure emerged from the trees, naked, its body slick with mud and streaked with moss. It didn't run or charge. It twitched, head jerking slightly, mouth open, breathing loud, its eyes locked on Trevor. Neither of us moved. Then Trevor stepped back and snapped a branch underfoot. The figure shrieked, high and sharp, and instantly, more of them rose from the brush, silent, watching, all around. "Run," I shouted. And we did. We tore through the woods like animals on fire, branches whipping at our faces, roots grabbing at our feet. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how many were following. Trevor was just ahead of me, breathing hard, but moving fast. Then I stumbled. My foot hit a dip between two rocks, and my ankle folded under me with a crack that made my stomach flip. I hit the ground hard and gasped. Trevor turned immediately, grabbed me under the arms and hauled me up without a word. Every step after that was pain, white, searing, shooting up my leg with every uneven root and jagged slope. I leaned on Trevor's shoulder, half hopping, half dragging myself forward. We tried to backtrack, but the markers we'd tied to the trees were gone. Every bend looked the same. Every ridgeline blurred into the next. It was like the trail had eaten itself. Then we saw the shirt, Trevor's spare, the one he'd folded and left at camp, now pinned to a tree with a long, sharpened wooden spike. It was hanging about eye level, and the cloth was damp, stretched like someone had wrung it out. "We didn't come this way," I said. Trevor didn't answer, just pulled it down with a sharp tug and kept moving. The woods opened up a little as we stumbled across the ruins of an old fire tower. The top section had collapsed years ago, but the base remained, a half-sunken metal frame covered in vines and rust. Beneath the collapsed beams was a hollow big enough for the two of us to squeeze into. We ducked down inside and caught our breath. I could barely move my ankle, and Trevor looked pale, his hands shaking just slightly. For a long while, nothing happened. We sat in silence, pressed close under the beams, listening. The sun shifted overhead and dipped below the trees, throwing the forest into that eerie, early dusk where everything turns blue. At one point, I thought I saw movement far off, a figure stepping between two trees, but it never came closer. We stayed like that for hours, long enough that I started to believe they'd given up. Trevor leaned over and whispered, "We'll stay till morning. Move when it's light." Then, night settled like a weight. Then, the sound started. Low throat clicking. Soft at first, from somewhere deep in the trees. Then another. Then more. All around us. Click. Click, click. Click. I held my breath. The sound got closer. Then a hand slid under the collapsed beam. Gnarled. Gray. Nails like bark. Skin leathery and stretched too tight over knuckles. It grabbed my jeans. Tugged hard. I yelled and kicked, twisting away. The thing hissed and withdrew, but more were coming. I could see them now, crawling low to the ground, moving fast and jerky, like broken insects, wearing people's skin. Trevor swung a rusted pipe he'd found nearby, clipping one of them across the jaw. It barely flinched. Another grabbed his arm, yanked him back hard enough to spin him halfway out of the shelter. I grabbed his jacket and pulled, felt the fabric rip under my fingers. He came free, stumbling, and we burst out from under the beams, running blind. The forest didn't feel like forest anymore. It was a cage. Thorns tore at our legs. Branches clawed our faces. Something was behind me. Close. I could hear it breathing. Wet, rasping breaths right at the back of my neck. I looked back for just a second and saw a face. Too wide, too low, grinning, teeth like broken glass. Then the light hit. A floodlight, bright and blinding, swept across the trees. Engine roaring. An ATV. Ranger, patrol. The moment the light touched the figures, they scattered. No scream, no sound. Just gone, like they'd never been there. Rough hands grabbed me. I was too stunned to fight. "You boys went off the map," the ranger said. "Trail doesn't run through here." Never did. Trevor couldn't speak, just stared into the dark, shaking. I didn't say much either. What could we say? We rode out in silence. I clutched my side, ankle throbbing, eyes still burning from the light. Just before we turned the bend toward the station, I glanced back. There was one figure left, standing still in the tree line, not hiding, not moving, arms too long, head tilted sideways like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. I still hear it sometimes. Weeks later, in my apartment, lights on, doors locked. Just past midnight, when everything else is quiet. Click, 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 click. The metal sign was barely holding on. Rust had eaten its edges like moss eats stone, and half the letters were buried in a tangle of vine. I brushed the leaves back with my glove and read it again. Private land. No entry. The words were warped and softened by time, but someone had taken a rifle or shotgun to it at some point. 5 holes punched straight through the middle, clustered like a pattern. I stood there a minute longer than I should have, hand still on the bark, trying to decide if it felt like a warning or a challenge. I'm Delaney Carr, 32, boots older than my car, and too used to long silences in deep woods. I work environmental field contracts all over western North Carolina, mostly solo. Sometimes I'm out here for weeks, measuring soil acidity, cataloging undergrowth, mapping runoff patterns. This job was a reforestation study. Land that had been clear-cut decades ago, now supposedly rebounding. On paper, I was day 4 into a 10-day solo assessment deep in a section of forest that hadn't seen much foot traffic in years. My GPS called it unmapped, which was wrong. It had once been mapped, clearly, just not lately. I was following the ghost of an old logging road, half swallowed by underbrush, that didn't appear on any of the official trail records. It twisted around the ridgeline like it had forgotten where it was going. I thought of my dad, how he used to take me on backpacking trips in the Smokies when I was a kid. We'd sit in the tent at night, drawing little hand-drawn maps of the trails we walked. He used to say, "Don't trust old roads. They go where people don't belong anymore." Back then, I thought it was just his way of keeping me close. The first strange thing I found was a Polaroid, lying face down in the dirt near a bend. I almost stepped on it. Water damaged, corners curled, but the image was still there. A black and white shot of a man standing in front of a small cabin. His face had been scratched out, violently. Deep white gouges across the photo like someone had stabbed it with a key. I slipped it into my notebook without thinking too hard about it. Probably just some old hunter's trash. I kept moving. The road narrowed as I went. The trees growing closer. The trail pinched in places like the woods were reclaiming it inch by inch. Then I started noticing the branches. Broken limbs. Snapped clean. All leaning in the same direction. At first I thought it was wind damage, but it was too consistent. Every 50 or 60 feet. Another one. Same height. Same break angle. Like someone had marked a path, but not for people. That night, I set up camp in a flat clearing off a dry creek bed. I'd seen old game trails nearby and figured it was the safest flat spot I'd find. I was used to sleeping light, but I woke just after midnight to a deep thumping sound. Slow, irregular, almost like someone smacking a wooden board against a tree. Not footsteps. Not quite natural. I sat up, unzipped my tent partway, and scanned the dark with my headlamp. Nothing but trees. Still, I stayed awake till dawn. The next day, I pushed deeper in. Around mid-morning, I found a circle of stones, maybe 3 feet across, filled with animal teeth, all different shapes and sizes, from molars to sharp incisors. Clean, laid out like a ritual or a trapper's marker. My stomach turned, but I logged the coordinates and kept moving. Weird stuff out here wasn't new. People lived strange, and the mountains always had stories. By late afternoon, I was following the stream toward its source, trying to get a water sample before the light faded. I bent down to fill a vial, and my eye caught something gleaming in the brush nearby. A wire snare trap, freshly reset. The ground around it was disturbed, but there weren't any animal tracks. No scat, no fur. It felt too clean. Then I heard it. Movement, brush shifting, a faint exhale. "Hello," I called out. No answer. I turned, slowly, my hand still holding the sample kit. Something crouched in the scrub about 20 feet away. Naked. Skin blackened with soot, eyes wide, too wide. The head tilted just slightly. Mouth parted but no breath I could hear. It didn't blink. Then it scurried off, fast, dropping to all fours, like an animal that never walked upright. I dropped everything and ran. I was packed and moving before the first light hit the ridge. No breakfast, no water sample logs, just adrenaline and the last of my bearings. My plan was simple: follow the GPS southwest, hit the gravel forest road I'd come in on by midday, and call for pickup from the nearest ranger station. But after an hour of hiking, I checked my screen again, and it had looped. The little blue arrow that should have pointed toward the edge of the map was now spinning in circles, then reorienting back to the same spot. Same junction, same dead tree with the hollowed-out trunk. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen, trying not to panic. It had to be signal interference, I told myself. Maybe something messing with the satellite connection. I switched over to compass mode and started following due south manually. After 30 minutes, I passed a set of rocks shaped like an arrowhead, the exact same formation I'd already passed before. Then I heard it, a baby crying. Except it wasn't right. Too steady, too spaced out, like someone had recorded the sound and was playing it back on a loop. 10 seconds on, 5 seconds off. The hairs on my arms lifted. It echoed through the trees in a way no infant ever could. I didn't go toward it. I just kept walking, faster now, scanning the woods like the trees might start to move. When I found the shack, it felt like both a gift and a threat. Half collapsed, hidden in a grove of beech trees. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. But inside, it told a different story. The old cast-iron stove still held warm ash. The wooden floor was littered with bones. Small ones, cleaned and stacked in neat piles near the back wall. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something sour. I crouched behind an old shelf and waited, barely breathing. Not long after, something passed outside. I couldn't see it fully, just the shape. Tall, slow, dragging something heavy. I heard the metallic scrape of chain on wood. It circled the shack twice, then went silent. I didn't move for hours. Night came fast. My headlamp flickered once but held. I gripped a broken chair leg like a weapon and crept back into the trees. The path was gone now. No markers. No trail. Just endless brush and scattered leaves. Every noise felt amplified. Every shadow a threat. I moved slow, dragging my injured leg, using the stick to prod the ground ahead. Then something dropped in front of me. It landed hard, tall, lean, matted hair hanging past its shoulders. The face was wrong, stretched, slack-jawed, eyes too bright in the beam of my headlamp. It opened its mouth but didn't speak, just let out a clicking sound, fast and mechanical, like teeth tapping glass. I ran. Behind me, others began to mimic it, clicking, breathing, matching the rhythm of my steps. One grabbed the strap of my backpack and yanked. Hard. The whole pack tore free, and I stumbled. Arms flailing, a hand scraped across my shoulder, rough and bark-like, fingernails digging through the fabric of my jacket. I screamed and kept going, crashing through brush until the ground vanished beneath me. I fell hard, down a ravine slick with moss and runoff. Mud caked my palms, and I couldn't feel my ankle anymore. I tried to get up, but slid again. Shapes gathered at the top of the slope, watching, waiting. Then came the sound, sharp and sudden. A single gunshot. The figures scattered without a sound, gone in seconds. A flashlight beam caught my face, and a voice called out, low and familiar, "You all right?" As Braction for unit. The man who pulled me out said his name was Ray. Looked like he belonged to the land. Rough jacket, lined face, quiet eyes. He helped me into his truck without another word. Back at his cabin, I asked if he knew what I'd seen. "You went through Cold Hollow," he said. He wouldn't say more. Weeks later, back in Asheville, my project supervisor asked what happened to my samples. Lost the equipment. I told him, rough terrain. This is no. I never turned in the report. Sometimes, when I'm driving back roads, I catch sight of old trailheads, places I've never marked, never meant to find. Last week, I passed one with a new carving nailed to the tree, a wooden handprint, upside down, stained dark with something I couldn't name. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The summer Ben went missing. The water at Stonehook Quarry was warm enough to swim in without that bone-deep shock. We were kids then, teenagers, barely 16, and the quarry was our secret ocean, ringed in limestone, deep as hell, cold on the bottom even in July. I remember the echo of our laughter bouncing off the cliffs, the slap of bodies hitting water, sun drying us on the flat rock shelves like lizards. That one day, the last one, Ben dared me to jump off the east ledge, the high one with the drop that made your stomach flip. I climbed up after him, chicken-hearted and stalling, and by the time I got there, he was already gone. No splash, no call, just the water below, rippling once. I'm 35 now, divorced, and back in the same county I once couldn't wait to escape. I write features for a regional paper, profiles, obits, sometimes the weird news column when they're short-staffed. A month ago, my editor pitched a series on unsolved Appalachian vanishings. Local ghosts, she called it. My name landed on the assignment, and I didn't argue. I'd been circling back to Stonehook in my head for years. I told myself I was writing for the paper. Truth was, I needed to see it again. I brought my old hiking journal, still dog-eared and half full of trail sketches and gear notes from back when I thought I'd grow up to be some kind of wilderness guide. I parked where the logging road cuts off and hiked the last mile in, boots crunching through underbrush and loose shale. The quarry hadn't changed much. Still that wide, unnatural bowl of blue-green water ringed in sheer gray cliffs. Trees grew taller now, closer to the rim, and the air felt stiller, like everything was holding its breath. The first strange thing I found was wedged into a tree root at the cliff's edge. A shoe. Canvas. Faded red. The laces frayed to threads. Looked almost new, but the rubber sole was warped like it had been left too long in heat. Not from the 90s. That was for sure. I turned it over. Saw no bite marks. No moss. Just dirt and an odd streak of white. Like lime dust. Later, while circling the eastern ridge, I noticed something carved into the quarry wall. Not mining scars. These were long, narrow slots, evenly spaced, just wide enough for a person to squeeze into. Vents. Maybe, but they weren't mapped. I'd seen the old stone company's plans once in the county archives. None of those shafts went that high. These looked newer, hand-dug, crude. That night, I set up camp just outside the tree line. My tent overlooked the water, and I was hoping to get a long exposure shot of the stars over the quarry rim. Around midnight, the moaning started. Low. Distant. Not wind. It came from inside the rock. A sound that rose and fell. Slow and pained. Like someone exhaling through stone. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. Headlamp off. Breath held. It went on for nearly 10 minutes. I didn't sleep much after that. At sunrise, I found a spiral of bones 30 feet from my tent. Clean. Animal. Arranged carefully, like teeth in a jawbone, curling inward on themselves. No prints. No fur. I took a photo, wrote down the coordinates, and packed my gear. I told myself I was done, that I'd file a write-up, throw in some old interview quotes, call it good. But I couldn't leave. I kept pacing the perimeter of the quarry, journal in hand, like maybe I'd missed something. And I had. Just past a dense thicket of laurel, down a steep bank behind a pile of slag rock. I found it. An opening. Small, maybe chest high, carved, not blasted, set back into the wall like it had been hidden on purpose. The entrance smelled of damp clay and something older, a stillness that made the hair on my arms lift. I should have turned back. Instead, I knelt, shined my light inside, and saw that the passage continued. Narrow, straight, barely enough room to crawl. Then I heard it, the scuff of movement, and I saw the silhouette, a figure, hunched, crawling fast toward me on all fours, limbs moving too quick for how low the ceiling was. I scrambled backward, breath caught in my throat. As I reached daylight, something slammed against the rock just behind me. A deep, wet thud that shook the loose stones at my feet. I didn't look back. I just ran. I spent the rest of that night in the back of my car, parked outside a 2-star motel on the edge of town. I didn't sleep. Not really. I kept the dome light on. The doors locked. Windows cracked just enough to keep the glass from fogging up. My hands still shook when I touched the steering wheel. I kept seeing the shape in that tunnel, the way it moved. Too fast for how low the ceiling was. Too silent for how much space it filled. Whatever it was, it hadn't followed me out, but it had hit the stone behind me like it wanted to. The next morning, I checked into the motel properly and told myself I'd just write up what I had. Stick to folklore. Reference Ben vaguely. No names. No specifics. But sometime after lunch, I found myself back in town, buying a better headlamp, a spool of climbing rope, and spare batteries. I didn't want to go back, but I knew I would. The tunnel wasn't just a lead. It felt like it was connected. To the quarry, to Ben, maybe even to that strange way the place made you feel like the trees were listening. By late afternoon, I was back at the rim. The air had turned. Windless. Flat. I slid down the bank behind the slag heap and crouched at the tunnel mouth again. Rope tied to a thick tree trunk just in case. Inside, the crawl space felt tighter. The walls were rough and damp, scratched with markings I didn't recognize. Symbols, not letters, etched deep like someone had carved them with stone or bone. Bits of cloth hung from exposed roots overhead. Chewed plastic wrappers scattered the floor. Something had been living down here. Then the tunnel dropped, and a vertical shaft, maybe 15 feet deep, walls slick with moisture and scored with handholds. I leaned over and listened. Breathing. Soft. Slow. Coming up from the dark. I turned off my headlamp and backed out fast. Outside, I sat in the dirt, catching my breath. That's when she found me. Her name was Sarah. Mid-30s maybe. Flannel shirt. Hiking pack. Notebook. Tucked under one arm. She said she was an amateur folklorist, researching post-mining Appalachian ghost towns. We talked for hours, sitting just outside the quarry. Trading stories. She knew the names of old mining families. Talked about how some workers refused to leave when the company pulled out. Said there were rumors they moved underground. Whole families, disappearing into the old shafts like burrowers. Some of the local stories called them the hollowed ones. Said they weren't dead, just emptied. She agreed to meet me the next morning to go in together. But I didn't wait. I was back before dawn, checking my gear, double knotting my boots, heart pounding. I wanted to see the bottom of that shaft before she arrived, just enough to know if the story was real. The tunnel felt colder this time. About 30 feet in, I heard her voice. Caleb. Hey, did you already go in? That's dead no. Faint. Farther in than she could have reached by then. I froze. Sarah. And to a silence. Then again. Same tone. Same pitch. Caleb. It's okay. I'm here. Didn't I paying? Too far. Too deep? I moved forward. Headlamp sweeping the stone. Breath caught in my throat. The tunnel widened. Old support beams jutted out at odd angles, black with age. Some splintered like something had clawed past them. Then something grabbed my ankle. Hard. I fell, head cracking against the wall. Light flickered. Pain spiked up my leg. I kicked, and the grip let go. In the weak beam of my headlamp, I saw them. Figures, crawling toward me on hands and knees. Pale skin stretched tight over bone. Eyes glassy and black, like water in deep caves. Mouths open, but no sound. One reached for my chest, claws tearing through my shirt. I swung the tripod, connected with a crunch. It shrieked, high and sharp, like metal on metal, but didn't fall. I turned and scrambled, dragging myself out with raw hands. Headlamp swinging wildly. Behind me, fingers clawed through the dirt, scraping stone. I felt them graze the back of my calf as I pulled myself into the light. Then they stopped. Wouldn't cross the threshold. Back in town, I reviewed my camera footage. Corrupted. Just static and black flashes. The audio full of hissing and clicking. I waited at the diner the next day for Sarah. She never showed. Motel clerk said no one by that name ever checked in. A month later, I went back to the quarry, just to leave something for Ben. Flowers. A note. A piece of the map we'd drawn as kids. There was a new hole in the rock wall, closer to the ground this time. Inside, just barely visible in the gloom, was a child's shoe, placed neatly on a stone ledge, facing out. I first saw the fence while tracking Vixen 87, one of my tagged females that had been denning near the VA. KY border for most of the summer. The chain link was rusted through, half buried under decades of loam and moss. But it still stood, long and twisted through the trees, like someone had tried to draw a boundary deep in a place that never asked for one. What stopped me was the clothing. Scraps of flannel and denim twisted into the top row of metal. Knotted like someone had tried to climb and got caught. A single shoelace, frayed and looped through the links like a snare, fluttered when the wind passed. It felt wrong, not vandalized, not abandoned. Left. My name's Hannah Keene. I'm 29. A wildlife researcher with a regional grant focused on fox population density in Appalachian edge zones. I grew up in Richmond, spent most of my career on urban corridors, storm drains, creek beds, railroad margins. Out here, things were different, wilder, quieter, the kind of quiet that eats your time in chunks. My mentor once told me, never follow a collared animal too far from mapped ground. There's things out there don't want company. I'd laughed. But when Vixen 87's signal started showing erratic movement into an unsurveyed region, I didn't hesitate. I packed 3 days of supplies and went in. The trail narrowed fast. Trees got denser. Light turned green. I moved slow, checking the collar pings every 30 minutes. Just after noon on the second day, I found it. The collar, still pulsing its weak signal, hanging from a stake. A crude one, wood, sharpened and driven deep into the earth like a warning. The collar was snapped and chewed, the kind of damage you might see from coyotes or a panicked pull. But the way it hung there, deliberate. Surrounding it were thin strips of rawhide, stretched between low branches, and teeth. Small, yellowed, embedded into the bark of a nearby tree. From that point on, the forest changed. Paths narrowed to veins of mud between roots. Moss covered everything, not soft, but thick, fibrous, almost knotted. Some trees had deep gashes near the base, long and low, like something had dragged claws just above the dirt line. I found a pit not long after, wide, shallow, filled with bones. Animal, mostly, but not just animal. One looked like a femur, human-sized. I didn't dig to find out. I tried sending a location ping with my satellite communicator. Full battery. No signal. It didn't even try to connect. Like the air itself refused to carry anything out. When night fell, it was sudden, like someone had flipped the forest off. I camped light. No fire. Just my tarp and a thermal blanket. Around midnight, I heard the wailing. Long, high-pitched screams echoing through the trees. Too far off to place. Too human to dismiss, but there was something off. It came in waves, like a pattern, like people trying to sound like they were in pain. I didn't sleep. The real horror came closer to dawn. Something shuffled outside my tent. Leaves crackled, slow and careful, like someone circling. Then my motion light snapped on. A man crouched outside the tarp, naked, covered in dirt and sap, skin pulled tight over bone. His head twitched, side to side like a moth pinned alive. His eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the light, back pale green. I didn't even have time to speak before more appeared behind him. 4, maybe 5, motionless, standing in a half circle. I fumbled for my flare gun, fired it straight over their heads. The light tore through the dark like lightning. They scattered, not running upright, but crawling, skittering, limbs bending wrong. By the time the smoke cleared, they were gone. I didn't wait for morning. I just ran. At first light, I was already moving. I didn't bother packing the tarp, just shoved essentials into my pack and started walking, limping from a twisted knee I didn't remember earning. I marked trees with orange string every 50 paces, trying to trace my way back. But something was off. Every time I stopped to check a knot or take a bearing, the string had vanished. In its place were bundles of moss twisted into braids, or worse, clumps of hair, tied tight between branches like snare lines. They weren't old. They were fresh. By late morning, I knew I wasn't heading out. I was just circling. The land folded over itself in unfamiliar ways. Gullies, where there were none before. Streams moving uphill, trails leading nowhere. Then I saw it. A rusted metal plate half buried in ferns. I cleared the brush with my boot. Unauthorized access, forbidden. Site 13 was stamped in weathered black letters. The bottom corner was clawed through. Deep grooves, like something had raked nails across steel. The forest felt heavier now, like it knew I was reading it. I pushed deeper until I found the bunker. It looked like it had erupted from the earth. Concrete sloped into a hillside. Rust streaking down from the hinges of a thick metal door left half ajar. I ducked inside and shut it behind me. The air inside was stale, but dry. Shelves of decayed rations lined the walls. And in the corner, a dusty emergency flashlight still worked after a few hard taps. There were maps too, old, yellowed, curled with moisture, showing the fence line I'd crossed. Only, it wasn't marked as a boundary. It was labeled containment. My breath caught. The fence wasn't to keep people out. It was meant to keep them in. I bandaged my knee, rested as much as I dared. When the sun fell, I turned the flashlight off to conserve the battery. Darkness settled in like a second skin. For a while, it was silent. Then I heard the banging. Not footsteps, not speech, just a single, rhythmic clang, metal being struck from outside, over and over, like someone slamming their head or fists against the bunker door. I gripped the flare gun, heart hammering, teeth clenched. Then it stopped, but not because they'd left. The door burst inward with a screech, and they flooded in, limbs spidering across the concrete, eyes reflecting the last bit of dying light from the entry. They didn't speak. They didn't moan. They shrieked. A dozen of them, maybe more, crawling fast, jerking, grabbing. One seized my hair, yanking me down. Another tore at my pack, scattering my supplies. I raised the flare gun and fired straight into the chest of the closest figure. The fire caught fast. It screamed, the sound of it, something I still hear when I close my eyes, and the others recoiled just enough for me to break free. I ran, found a back hatch half buried in soil and rolled out into the night, tumbling down a dry creek bed. Behind me, they didn't chase, but I could hear them, moving just out of sight, watching. I wandered for 2 more days before the forestry crew found me near the highway, dehydrated, incoherent. I told them I'd gotten lost chasing a fox collar. That's all. I deleted the tracking data, every file, every waypoint, no interviews, no follow-ups. Weeks later, I went hiking again, somewhere safer, somewhere mapped. But on a ridge near the state line, I found it, a new chain-link fence, gleaming in the morning light. And fluttering in the wind, tied high near the top, was a fresh strip of red flannel, torn, knotted into the wire, like a warning, or a mark, or a message. They were still there, and they were keeping the line. We parked at the ranger gate just before noon, the trail already warm beneath our boots. 4 of us, all loaded down with packs and way too much enthusiasm. Kat had her vintage film camera slung around her neck. Aaron had packed enough beef jerky to feed a wolf pack. And Jules, of course, was already making horror movie jokes before we even hit the tree line. Me. I was quieter than usual, 30 years old, and still felt like that awkward teenager every time I stepped into these woods. The last time I'd hiked this far south in the park was with Matt, my cousin, my best friend. That was 10 years ago. We'd wandered off trail and found a chimney standing alone in a clearing. Red stone, weathered down to bone. No house, no rubble, just the hearth. A month later, Matt went missing. People said he got lost. I never believed that. I hadn't told the others why I picked this route, just said it was peaceful, remote. I didn't mention how this part of the forest thinned out into hollows, how the air here felt heavier, like it remembered more than it should, or how I'd had dreams about that old chimney every fall since Matt disappeared. "Yo," Jules called ahead, pointing. "Who the hell's been making fires out here?" Ingli Naprofiket and him. We slowed. There it was, just off the trail. A chimney standing alone, blackened with soot. The top had crumbled inward, and the ground around it was scorched in a perfect circle, as if the fire never stopped. No house, no foundation, just the hearth. Squatter. Maybe, Aaron said. Ballsy. Out this far. His washin'. Kat raised her camera and snapped a shot. Jules stepped closer and grinned. Bet it still works. Wanna roast a squirrel? It's kudmo. I stepped past them, boots crunching through soft ash. In the heart of the fire pit, something caught the light. I crouched, brushing away the soot. A small bone, pale, smooth, and cracked clean down the center, like something had sucked the marrow out. I pocketed it before the others saw. The trail grew quieter after that. No wind, no birdsong, just the sound of our boots and the soft creak of our packs. When we reached the clearing, wide, flat, ringed by thick trees, nobody said much. We set up camp. The stillness didn't lift. That night, I woke to footsteps, not running, not sneaking, just pacing, slow, steady, circling the camp. I held my breath, listened. The others were still asleep. Then a twig cracked just outside my tent. In the morning, Jules found the first bundle, moss wrapped tight with something inside, bound with sinew and tied to a branch above us. Aaron found 2 more. We didn't open them. Someone's messing with us, he said, but his voice didn't sound sure. Later, Aaron swore he saw someone behind the chimney we passed. Just a glimpse, a shoulder, a flicker of movement. But when we checked, no one was there. Just the blackened stone. We tried to laugh it off, kept busy. Firewood, water, food. We hiked a short loop trail, stayed close. But the woods felt wrong. Thicker, closer, like they were waiting. It wasn't until late afternoon that we returned from the ridge and saw the tent. Slashed down the side, gear scattered, food torn open, and the fire. Our fire was burning again. Not coals, not embers. Flames. Fresh wood, like someone had just lit it. Jules stopped short. Did one of you come back early? This actor? No, Kat whispered. And then we saw him. At the edge of the clearing, wrapped in burlap, head covered in bark, face hidden, still as a scarecrow. Then he stepped forward. I yelled. We ran. Kat and I didn't stop running until the woods blurred. Branches clawed at our arms. Roots rose underfoot, but we didn't look back. No sound of pursuit, just the thud of our boots, our gasping breaths, and the way the trees leaned like they wanted to close behind us. We didn't know where Aaron and Jules went, just that they weren't with us, and that we couldn't go back. When we finally stopped, I bent over, hands on knees, heart trying to tear out of my chest. Kat dropped to the ground beside a fallen log, clutching her side. Her camera was gone, torn from her neck while we ran. I didn't ask how bad she was hurt. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were wild, tracking every shadow. We have to find them, she said, voice barely more than breath. I nodded, but neither of us stood up right away. It wasn't long before we saw the marks. Dragged trails cutting through the pine needles. Shallow grooves, like something heavy had been pulled. No blood, but footsteps. Bare, human, and too many of them, moving in a wide arc deeper into the hollow. I didn't want to follow. My body screamed not to, but Kat was already walking. The trees thinned into a wide, burnt stretch of forest. Blackened trunks, scorched earth, and there, standing like teeth around an open mouth, were chimneys. At least 10, all crumbling, all alone. Hearths without homes. The ground around each one was dark, as if the fire never really left. A low humming hung in the air. Low, steady, almost like breath caught in a throat. We circled the ring slowly, too exposed to feel safe, too scared to run again. The drag marks led toward one of the chimneys. It looked older than the rest. Dark stone, streaked with soot, its interior hollow and cold. I could swear it was exhaling. A warmth touched my face that shouldn't have been there. Kat pulled me toward what looked like an old root cellar. The wooden doors split open and half buried in ash. Inside, it was damp, close, and colder than it should have been. We shut the door behind us, sat in the dark, listened, our breath fogged in the air. On the walls, scratched into the dirt and wood, were warnings, faded, broken lines. One still readable in the beam of my flashlight: "Don't let them touch the smoke." Bones littered the corners, old cans, long rusted through, ratty bedding, and something that might have been a boot. Someone had stayed here before, someone who didn't want to be found. We waited. We didn't speak. Every creak outside made us flinch. I kept the flashlight off most of the time, conserving batteries. Darkness pressed in heavy. Hours passed. Maybe more. I don't know when I fell asleep, but it was Kat who woke me, shaking me hard, whispering, "Smoke." Did all that. At first, I thought it was just smell. Then I saw it. Thin ribbons drifting in from the cellar steps, curling in from cracks in the ceiling. But there was no fire, no light, just smoke, moving like it had a purpose. We backed into the far corner. Kat covered her mouth. I held my breath. Then we heard them. Above us. Crawling. The ceiling creaked. Then again. Long limbs scraped wood. A face. No. A shape. Blackened and stiff. Peered through a split beam. No eyes. Just soot. It moved like it didn't understand how bodies were supposed to bend. Then one dropped. No sound. Just a thud and a rush of smoke as it landed beside Kat. She screamed. It reached for her, long fingers stiff, creaking as they flexed. She kicked, tried to crawl away, but it grabbed her leg, started pulling her toward the stairs. I lunged, yelling, grabbing at her arm. I clawed at the thing's face, my fingers sinking into something dry and brittle under the soot. It didn't react, but more were coming, slipping down the chimney, crawling from the cracks, limbs snapping as they unfolded. I saw the lantern, smashed, but half full. I grabbed it, threw it hard against the stone wall. It burst, flames caught, smoke exploded upward. They shrieked, not loud, but like wind in a dead tree. I dragged Kat back, kicked the door open, and we ran, through fire, through smoke, into the burning dark. I don't know how long we ran. I don't remember how I got out. They found me the next morning on a firebreak trail, barefoot, half-conscious, burned and shaking. The others, gone. Now, back in my apartment, I try to sleep. I light a candle sometimes, thinking it'll help. But tonight, I hear footsteps, slow, pacing, right above me. And I live on the top floor. You sure it's safe? This safe tinwood stall, in this benning, safe enough. And decidin', seriously, it's $200 for 4 nights. Middle of nowhere. Agin' too. We'll be fine. The check 10. I stared at the messages one more time before locking my phone. Josh was the one who found the cabin. Danny booked it under her name. I just needed out. Out of Johnson City. Out of my apartment. Out of my head. The three of us hadn't been together since college, and the idea of a no-cell service getaway deep in the Blue Ridge felt like a kind of medicine. Unfamiliar air, cheap wine, a little static silence between me and all the memories I was trying to shake. The drive was long, winding through leaf-slicked roads and steep drop-offs. October had settled in early, painting the hills in rust and flame. I sat in the back seat, boots tucked under me, one hand gripping the thermos I didn't drink from. Josh and Danny bickered up front about the playlist. It was easy, being around them, like slipping on an old hoodie that still kind of fit. "Remember that one state park we camped at with Brad?" Danny asked, throwing a glance over her shoulder. I nodded, even though I didn't want to. "He packed a goddamn turkey fryer." "Thanks." Josh laughed. "Dude brought a cast iron skillet and 6 bags of charcoal. For one night, then dime. Yeah. This time, I packed light. It to be ancients." We reached the cabin just before dusk, perched on a slope, back against the trees. It looked newer than I expected. Wide porch, green tin roof, fresh gravel driveway. Only thing wrong was the front door. Slightly open, like someone forgot to pull it shut. The rental company had texted me the door code that morning. No reason it should have been ajar. Josh pushed it open. "Hello, Airbnb. We're not here to die. We're here to drink." This fact of passing. Inside, everything looked fine. Cleaner than most rentals I'd stayed in. Neutral couch, thin throw blankets. The kind of art that looked like it came from a gas station. Kitchen was stocked. Beds were made. I took the room with the far window, set my bag down, opened the closet, then stopped. Scratches. Long, faint drag marks along the inside wall, like someone, or something, had scraped down it with a metal edge. I touched the grooves. Dusty. Old. Probably nothing. But I didn't sleep easy that first night. Around 1 a.m., something moved under the floor. I heard it through the mattress. A slow shift. A bump, like something heavy dragging itself through the crawl space. Josh called out from the living room. "Raccoons. Probably plotting." The grain to know. In the morning, we found the straw dolls. 3 of them, bundled in rough shapes, tied with string, hidden behind the couch like someone had tucked them out of sight. Danny picked one up with 2 fingers and winced. "Hell no. Not into hillbilly voodoo. It's opera. I think it's folk art," I said, though I wasn't sure. She tossed them into the firewood box by the back porch. Well, folk it off. Would not the calm. That night, the tapping started. I woke up around 2:40 a.m. to a tap 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 behind my head. Not outside. Inside the wall, right where the scrape marks were. I sat up. The sound stopped. Dead silence. I waited. It never came back. The next day, rain rolled in, heavy and cold. Thunder cracked right over the ridge around midnight. We lit candles, drank from the bottle of cheap whiskey Josh brought, tried to wait out the storm. Then the power went out. We were laughing when it happened, nervous energy, but the laughter dried fast. The cabin dropped into dark so sudden, so thick. It felt like falling. Then came the whispering. Low, breathy sounds. Not words. Just voice. Beneath the floor. I froze. Josh grabbed his flashlight, walked to the crawlspace door in the hallway. Danny and I followed, feet bare on the cold wood. He opened the door. The beam caught something pale. A face. Maybe. Covered in dirt. Eyes wide. Unblinking. Just inches below the stairs. It moved. A hand reached for the top step. Danny screamed. Josh slammed the door shut. We didn't sleep. We tried the car at first light. Josh turned the key once. Twice. Nothing. He popped the hood, cursed, then just stood there, staring down into the engine like it had personally insulted him. I joined him, leaned in, and saw it too. The battery wasn't just dead. It was gone. Not disconnected. Ripped clean out, like something had reached in and taken it. Danny started pacing. Phone held high for a signal. No bars. Not even a flicker. The cabin's router sat dark. No lights. I tried the landline on the kitchen counter out of desperation, but it was dead too. Just soft static. The world outside had shrunk overnight. Whatever was in the walls had pulled us out of ours. We shoved the couch against the crawlspace door, pushed the dining table over too, just in case. Josh suggested we try the attic, see if there was an old radio, maybe something left behind. I went with him, flashlight flickering. The attic was cramped and hot despite the cold outside, filled with insulation and dust. But in the far corner, we found a crate of yellowed newspapers wrapped in twine. Most were dated from the 1970s. We sat in the dust, flipping through them. Headlines about mining accidents, cave-ins. One front page showed a school photo, 5 missing children, all local. All vanished over a 3-year span. The article mentioned abandoned shaft networks near the ridge, and that some believed families had squatted in them for years, that they'd gone feral. Jesus, Josh muttered, setting the paper aside. We're not alone out here. Goody way there. Back downstairs. It was quiet. No tapping. No voices. Just stillness. We took turns sleeping, curled up on the floor. Knives from the kitchen gripped tight in our hands. I kept staring at the fire, even when it burned low, waiting for something to shift in the shadows. When morning came, the silence held. The woods beyond the windows looked unchanged. Cold, quiet, wet with mist, but safer somehow. We decided to hike down the mountain trail. It'd take a few hours, but if we stuck to the gravel road, we could make it to a gas station or ranger outpost before dark. I went to pack up my things. That's when I saw the dolls again. Same ones we'd tossed. Back on the mantel above the fireplace, perfectly arranged, their little twine limbs bent like they were watching us. I didn't say anything, just left them there. We started down the trail around 10. Mist hung low, no wind. Every branch snap made us jump. We walked single file. Josh in front, Danny in the middle, me in the back. The woods were too quiet. The air felt thick, like something was holding its breath. Halfway down, we saw the first one. Under a fallen log, just a crouched shape. Could have been a person, could have been a mannequin. Didn't move. Then another, behind a tree this time, half covered in burlap. Arms too long, skin dark with soot. Its face was smeared with ash. Eyes wide, teeth bared in something that might have been a grin. Josh hissed, "Don't run." Always two, but Danny screamed. They came from all sides. Dozens. Bare. Thin. Feral. Their bodies blackened. Cracked in places. Limbs too stiff. Like they hadn't moved in years. But they moved now. One grabbed Danny's ankle. She went down screaming, clawing at the dirt. Josh and I turned, tried to pull her back. But they swarmed too fast. I saw hands. Filthy. Strong. Dragging her into the brush. Josh yelled. I yanked him back. And we ran. Branches tore at our faces. Thorns shredded my coat. One of them reached for me, long nails catching my sleeve. Dragging. I twisted, kicked, broke free. We didn't stop until the forest broke open onto gravel. A logging truck barreled past minutes later, brakes screaming as the driver saw us staggering into the road. He leaned out the window, swearing, asking what happened. I couldn't answer. Just said, "Cabin's not safe." This meant he took us to town. I haven't spoken to Danny's parents. Haven't returned to the ridge. But some nights, back in my apartment, when everything's still and quiet, I hear it again. That same soft tap, tap, tap behind the wall, right behind my bed. The gravel popped under my tires like old bones. Late afternoon sun blinked through the windshield. Trees narrowing in on both sides of the forestry road. Bitter Creek wasn't even on the main maps anymore. Just a nameless branch of dirt threaded through a forgotten corner of eastern Kentucky. The company GPS had me 10 miles off grid, and even my own topo didn't mark this spur. But I knew it, or thought I did. My name's Leo Mercer. I've been a land surveyor most of my life. Independent now, mostly pipeline contracts, the kind no one talks about too loud. I was raised 2 hollers over from here. Knew the ridge lines like the back of my hand. Or used to. My grandfather used to say, some places, the mines closed, but not everybody left. He'd grown up hearing stories, folks who went too deep, lived too long underground, and forgot how to come back up. As a kid, it sounded like a warning. As a man, it sounded like metaphor. I was marking erosion zones for a new run of pipe. Simple stuff. Just a few flag markers. Some readings. And back before dark, the company hadn't surveyed this stretch in decades. No permits. No baseline data. I wasn't supposed to be down this road, technically, but the slope looked unstable on satellite, and I trusted my instincts more than their spreadsheets. The first strange thing I noticed were the trees. About 2 miles in, The hardwoods lining the path started showing crude X carvings. Low, eye level, and too fresh to be from logging crews. Rough work, like someone had dug in with a dull blade. No spray paint, no survey tape, no tags, not ours. I got out, took a few photos. The forest was quiet, not peaceful, just quiet. No birds, no bugs, like the kind of silence that happens after something already passed through. A few minutes later, I found the rocks, piled up just off the path. Flat stones, stacked in a way that formed a crude seat. Too neat to be random. And on top, fresh impressions, like someone had just stood up, but no boot prints, no drag marks. The ground around it was undisturbed. The wind shifted. I felt watched. I kept working, told myself it was nothing. These old woods play tricks on you. But about an hour later, I heard the whistle. 3 notes. High, low, I, echoing through the trees. Not a bird, not an animal. It had rhythm, like someone trying to call something. Not someone. I turned in a slow circle, every hair on my neck standing. Then I found one of my own marker stakes bent into a spiral, twisted like wire, strung with dried plant fibers and what looked like hair. I didn't touch it, just stared. My hands started to shake, and I couldn't tell you why. That's when my GPS glitched, flatlined. Compass spun. I held still, trying to orient by sun, but the canopy was too thick now. I felt turned around, unmoored. Dusk came fast, too fast. I gave up finding the last point and set up camp by a dry creek bed, just off the old ATV path. I'd done this dozens of times. Hell, I used to fall asleep in the woods with nothing but a bedroll and a transistor. But not here. Tonight felt wrong. The kind of wrong you don't admit out loud. I set up my tent, dropped the motion light on a tree branch nearby, just to feel better. Ate cold beef jerky, drank water from the jug like it was whiskey, kept one hand near my gear bag the whole time. Around midnight, the light flashed. Just once, then nothing. I waited, held my breath. Then again, 2 flashes this time. The sensor only triggers on movement. So I stepped out of the tent slow, holding my flashlight like a weapon. I swept the woods. Nothing. Just twisted shadows. My own breath coming too fast. Then the pacing started. Soft. Steady. Circling just beyond the light. Dry leaves, crunching in measured steps. Never rushing. Never stopping. Like it knew the line I wouldn't cross. I caught the shape first, by sound. Then by eyeshine. Pale. Limbs too long, like the joints bent backward. It stood beyond the trees, just outside the ring of light, watching. Then others emerged behind it, silent. Still, I ran. Branches slapped my face. Roots caught at my boots. But I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. I could hear them behind me, those steps, slow and even, like they were counting something down, not rushing. Not chasing, just following, like they knew I'd run out of breath before they did. Then I saw it, just ahead through the trees. A dark, low shape leaning into the slope. A shack. I didn't think. I sprinted the last few steps and threw myself at the door. It groaned, but opened. Dust and rot hit me as I stumbled inside. I slammed the door shut and dropped the old bar across it. More instinct than plan. No windows, no lights, just dry air and thin walls. I backed into the corner, gripping the broken stake I still had in my hand. Outside, nothing moved. But I knew they were still there, waiting. I left the shack just after dawn. No breakfast, no sense of direction, just motion. Every inch of me screamed to keep going, even if I didn't know where. The cold bit into my fingers and neck. But I barely felt it. I didn't trust my compass. My map stayed folded in my jacket pocket, damp with sweat and dirt. Useless now. The land wasn't where it used to be. The trees sloped downward in a way that felt like an exit. I followed it, hoping to hit a drainage line, an old service road, anything. The forest was quieter than it had any right to be. No birds, no breeze. Just my breath and the crunch of frost under boots that no longer felt like they belonged to me. That's when I saw it. Ahead, in a small clearing beneath a split pine, someone was sitting against the trunk. Upright, perfectly still, not slumped, not fallen, just placed. I didn't move closer than I had to. Faded work clothes, hands folded over a map pinned clean through with something thin and rusted. From where I stood, I could tell it was old, but not decayed. Arranged. I didn't check it, didn't want to, but the way the map was folded looked like mine. Same alignment, same topography. I backed away, never taking my eyes off the figure. It never moved, and somehow that made it worse. I kept walking, fast at first, then faster. I don't know how many hours passed. The light barely shifted. It felt like the day was stuck, held back somehow. At some point, the whistle returned. 3 notes. High, low, high, but drawn out this time. Slower, closer. I turned, heart already pounding, and saw them, emerging from the trees without sound, one by one. Some on all fours, some upright, limbs bent like they hadn't moved in years. Faces hidden in soot and bark and things I didn't want to understand. They moved in a way that didn't match the shape of their bodies. I ran, veered left, downhill, didn't care what direction. Something barreled through the brush behind me. Fast, hard. I stumbled, caught myself, kept going. One came up from the right, too close. I ducked, felt nails graze my sleeve. Fabric tearing. I didn't scream. I didn't have air to spare. I lost my pack on a branch. Didn't stop for it. Dropped everything I didn't need. Just ran until the slope gave out and I tumbled through a wash of mud and leaves, scraping to a stop near a stone outcrop. When I stood up, I knew exactly where I was. That tree. That clearing. But the figure was gone. Only a damp impression in the moss remained, like something heavy had been waiting there. Next to it, half buried, was a strip of rusted survey tape, curled like it had grown out of the ground. I didn't touch it. I pushed on until the forest broke, and gravel crunched beneath my boots. They found me 3 days later, stumbling barefoot down a service road, dehydrated, half speaking. I gave no statement, just said the job site wasn't viable. They asked me why I hadn't flagged it. I told them the land had changed. They laughed. I quit the same week, deleted the data, burned my old maps in the fire pit behind the garage. Haven't worn my gear since. But sometimes, on long drives through the back country, I still scan the trees at dusk. Just habit, I guess. And once, not long ago, I saw it again, far off the shoulder, beneath a crooked tree, a figure, sitting perfectly straight, hands folded in its lap, watching the road. It didn't move, and neither did I.